Hello and welcome to our discussion on the science of change. My name is Elysia Hegarty. I am the Associate Director at CPL's Future of Work Institute and your host of today's discussion. So resistance is an inherent part of change caused by stress and uncertainty and loss of control. While it's perfectly normal, as leaders we know that resistance also poses a threat to organisational change. However, approaches to change are often unscientific and lack a data-driven, human-centred approach. In turn, this leads to initiatives that lack impact and reinforcing the cycle of resistance that we're trying to overcome. Here to discuss this fascinating topic, I am joined by Barry Winkless, who is CPL's Chief Strategy Officer and Head of the Future of Work Institute. And I'm also joined by Dr. Brian Slattery, who is the CEO of Wrky. And we're really pleased today to announce our collaboration with Wrky as our people analytics partner, who will continue to collaborate with us on the evolution of our employee experience services for clients. So Barry, I'm going to ask you our first question. I know you've been working in change management for over 25 years. What are
Sounds like a lot of time, yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you've seen senior leaders face when it comes to driving any meaningful change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no one answer, I suppose, to this, but I think the big thing for me is a compelling vision, a compelling story of where they're trying to get to. So what I often find with the leaders that I work with over the past number of years is that whilst they have a relatively good concept in their head with their management team of where they're trying to get to, they can't necessarily turn that into a compelling story that will drive people along with them on that. So when we talk about things like storytelling, often people don't recognize the actual critical importance of it as a mechanism for change. So story is really, really important. That's one thing I've really learned. Everybody will talk about sponsorship being really important in terms of making sure change happens. And that has to happen not just at the leadership level, but all the way down, to every type of person within the organization. And I always like to say every person within the organization has their own story of the change that they're going to have to go through. And it's really important that we look at that from multiple perspectives and also look at it from a very human-centered perspective. Because ultimately, when we talk about change, it is about working on insights and wisdom. I know Brian's going to talk a lot about that. But then ultimately putting the right type of story, the right type of initiatives behind it for people to feel involved and also to move the organization forward. So I'd say when I put all of these things together, really for me, it's that idea of that compelling vision turned into a meaningful story that gels everybody in that organization together towards this, visionary goal. So I think that's absolutely critical. And then really important to me, along with that, is action.
Yeah.
So what are those hero projects that actually represent where we're trying to get to? It doesn't have to do everything, but what are those few things that we can do that represents the direction that we're trying to take? And they can be small projects or big projects, but they have to encapsulate that overall kind of change that we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and I like your emphasis on the human-centered approach and bringing people on the journey as well. So it's important to include everyone. Brian, Wrky, as we know, is a people analytics platform. What types of data should senior leaders really be considering when it comes to driving any meaningful change?
Okay, so it's a big question. There's a lot in that, but maybe to echo some of the sentiment there and to follow on from what Barry said, I think a key thing is, data informs people's strategy, right? If you have a people strategy, you have maybe different things or different elements in that. So for example, your hero projects or bringing people along the journey. So whatever you're trying to look at or change or move the needle on, you need to be capturing data around that, right? That's the first thing. So if you've got a strategy, it needs to be data driven now. In terms of the types of data, so you do have a kind of a person-centered approach, capturing data around people, what they're doing, their experiences in their workplace, how they feed into projects, how they move things along, how you can measure that. And then there's other data that can be used as well, obviously information that might sit inside a system that is just doing nothing. We call that exhaust data that can inform the strategy. So there needs to be joined up thinking there so you can move things along. But the actual types of data, I suppose, it's anything from the employee experience, sentiment, real cultural data, psychological data, that kind of information, and then other sort of quantitative data that might sit in the organization as well. But the key thing is, and I think just Barry touched on it as well, the data needs to be, it's more than just data, right? Okay, so you've got, data is really just meaningless unless it's meaningful data. And then the next thing is, it's actually the wisdom that you get from that or the insights you get from that actually drive the change. And can you see that over time, right? So if you have a project, whatever the case may be, you have a moment in time when it starts, and you need to measure that change at the end, okay? And you need the insight to say, well, actually, this has actually worked, and now we can roll that out to other parts of the business or something like that. You know, that's the key thing, okay? So I suppose that's probably how I would look at it, because it's different for different organizations, and different organizations are at different stages, I would say, in their life cycle, their journey, or their maturity with how to even think of data, right? But basically, they need to have some level or some layer of that there to inform what they're doing. And I do think, you know, one key thing as well is on the people side of things, the human resource side of things, that's the engine room of every business, you know. They're the one that, you know, everyone contacts. So there's a lot of information there that can be used, you know. So it's a question of tying it all together.
Yeah, and that kind of echoes as well what Barry is saying, is you kind of equally you can use a lot of that insights to be able to fuel the story that you're creating, essentially.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
if you think about it as well, actually, just, you know, Brian, one of the reasons I suppose we're working together is just that holistic perspective, right? You know, because we are dealing with a complex human system, and being able to look at, you know, different aspects of where we're trying to get to, I think is really, really important. And I like your point, Brian, about the wisdom side. You know, how do we actually, you know, look at something holistically, so we are getting new insights, you know, new perspectives on things that help us, you know, move things forward. And that's really at the heart of the Future of Work Institute, which is how do we adopt a much more holistic, comprehensive approach to how we adapt to a change mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And what are some of the models and frameworks, Barry, that can help organisations really harness change?
Well, look, I've been around a lot of models, right? Structured models, I should say, right? Just so we're clear. And for me, still the most impressive and most successful one I've used is a design process. You know, so the same way in which we use processes to design our products and services, you know, really adopting a design mindset and a design process to drive change. And the reason I say that is because design fundamentally puts the user and the people who are going to use that change, if you want to call it that, right at the center. So what I've recognized always is that when you involve people in the design of the change and in the design of the initiatives, change is actually built into the process. So change is built in right from the start of that process. So I think that's really important. So for me, the most successful change approach, you know, when done right, is a design-centric approach. It brings people along. It puts the emphasis on conversation and interactions and the use of insight, and also the use of real-time understanding of how things will work and won't work, etc. So I think for me, that's absolutely critical. And you know, that's your classic, you know, what I would call diverge-converge process. You know, where are we now? You know, let's reframe the way we're thinking about it. Where are all the ways we could go on this? And then working together to converge on a set of solutions that works for, you know, the large majority of the population within an organization. You're never going to get 100% of people, you know, on the journey. That's just the nature. And, you know, most research would say 10 to 15% of people won't really come with you on the journey, passive kind of activists or terrorists in the process. So that the design piece for me is really, really important. I think just to come back to, you know, Brian and our collaboration, you know, it's very much, I would say, kindred spirits when it comes to that, you know, design approach. And it's one of the reasons we've developed out this collaboration. So yeah, design process for me trumps a lot of those other, you know, models that are out there, and there are many, I should say. But the big thing I will say is, regardless of the model, you know, commitment is key. You know, committing, following a process, using those insights, using them properly, and, you know, committing to the journey. That's absolutely really important. I always say it's better to go down a wrong road with commitment than to go down no road.
Yes, true. I love the connected of this, you know, the storytelling, the insights, to the wisdom to drive it, and then kind of the design thinking, you know, you kind of an informed approach.
And I just think on that, if you go down the wrong road and you commit to it, you're measuring things correctly, you know it's the wrong road.
Yes.
With data. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, this is the wrong road, let's go again.
Yes.
You know, that's the point behind it all, you
Yeah.
know, so that's the, fantastic,
Oh, there you go. So Brian, it's no secret that HR, and HR has been my background as well, can be one of the least data-driven functions. What challenges did that pose for the function essentially responsible for change and people change within an organisation?
This is the difficult question, right? Or a difficult kind of situation that people find themselves in within a business and in the HR function. Because normally you go in and you have to kind of sell why data is a good thing. If you think about it, and I said it previously, HR is the engine room of a business, right? Everybody, irrespective of role, interacts with it. They're the only one, you know, they're the only facility or function that everyone interacts with. They're actually the all-seeing eye that has most of the data, okay? And they've taken a back seat, I believe, for far too long, okay? if you empower, I suppose, if a HR function is ready to do this, commit to that action, and empower them with real insights, it can go a long way, okay? So I think the main challenges are, firstly, is probably trying to understand or trying to convey to leadership why a data-driven HR function in a business is worthwhile. And then understanding, and I think this is the key thing, is taking your time and planning what you're going to do when you get data in, what's going to look like change, measurable, and how you can report that. Those are the top things, like how do you convey it, right? And then what are you going to do with it? And how do you prove out the concept that this was worthwhile, okay? And a lot of the time it's starting small with a small project, or testing the water, but committing that there will be some return and evidencing that. That is the key thing. And I often say, like I was thinking about this, right? If you imagine like any high functioning sports team, right? When you go in there and you look at it, it's data everywhere, right? Yeah. And the whole thing about that is getting their athletes on the pitch to do really well, right? If you think about it, and let's just say an injury, a hamstring injury or something, takes somebody out, it's a cost. Everything about that is about mitigating risk and costs. But when we're in a traditional, let's say, other business world, that seems like, oh, that's a cost to the business, as opposed to we want to keep our athletes and our organization and our people functioning at the best we can. This isn't a cost. I need to know if there's going to be a burnout issue. I need to know if there's going to be a better way to roll out I don't know, some sort of employee support system, or whatever the case may be, or an engagement platform, or whatever, whatever it is. Exactly. Attrition is a famous one, right? When you're sitting down, and every organization has this, and they might say, oh, well, we're at 20 or at 30 or whatever the case may be, and there's some that are much higher. You're like, how do we reduce that by 5%? If we could reduce that by 5%, you know, what's the impact financially and every other way on the business? If we stop losing top talent, you know? So I think that the hard part at the start is to maybe build the business plan around, from a HR perspective, around why it is an important thing now to be kind of a totally data-driven HR function. Yeah. But once you have that in place, then it becomes quite compelling, because quite quickly people start seeing results, you know? So yeah.
So any talent strategy then should ultimately have some form of insights informing it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's paramount. I mean, you would, and I do think the analogy with a high-performing sports team is important. Like, you wouldn't go out there and say, oh, we've been training, we're working away. All of the resources go into getting those people to perform on a pitch. It's not like we'll buy better goals or better, football boots. That's all taken for granted. You know what I mean? It's how do we kind of look at the talent strategy here to make these people and our operation really perform at a high level. And we use data, and ultimately meaningful data, or actually wisdom. So if we move the data driven back, we move meaningful data, which is the next layer, and look at actual insights, wisdom driven insights about our unique organization. You can make your talent thrive, you can make your HR function thrive, and you can actually step up beyond where HR, I believe, is, let's say, right to the top table and say, this is what we're going to do from a business strategy perspective. You know, this is what it looks like to have a high-performing team. This is what it looks like to have low attrition. Here's the data behind that. This is what we're gonna roll out on. You know. Yeah,
it's interesting actually you bring up the example of the athletics, the high-performing, because actually one of the key aspects of a high-performing team is visualization.
Yeah.
You know, visualizing what success looks like. So for me, that's where the beautiful convergence and interconnection of wisdom and storytelling come together, right? Because the more you understand the business, the more compelling you can create your vision of the future of that organization. So even from our own research in the Future Work Institute, you know, we looked at a number of organizations. When you really peel it back, they want to become more human, they want to become more societal centric, and they want to become more technological. Now, you cannot create that future organization without wisdom, without understanding that we don't know everything, that we have to go deeper around what we know about our business, what we know about our people in the business. And only then can we create, a compelling approach to the future. So that's where I love this. I always think when somebody says to me, what's the future work? The first thing it is convergent. It's converging all of these new ideas into something more meaningful. Why? Because we all, and particularly I would say more enlightened leaders, have a focus on how do we create a better organization, for our people, for our societies, etc. And that's very much linked to things like some of the conversations we were having around AI, there's a good thing, there's a bad thing. Having those discussions through data, through insight is absolutely critical, but they all come together ultimately to support this new vision of something better. And however different organizations, look at better, that's important. And I talk about leadership a lot because oftentimes when we do some work and we've done, analysis, it's often leadership that is an area that needs to be focused on. What does actually good leadership look like in our organization? And oftentimes people I speak to can't answer that question. So that's where I love this whole the convergence of all of these ideas into something that creates real impact.
Yeah, and I think on that, if you show that vision, this is where we want to be as a high performing organization. You commit to it, as you said, and then you put a plan in place. You have today is the day we start, and we need to be able to reflect back and say, well, how do we know we've gone the right road? Well, we can see with all our insights and data points coming back that we've actually made progress. So it all marries together to create something that in the future we're in a better place. So it's probably it's best practice. You know what I mean? To join these things up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think it needs to become best practice, because otherwise I think you just end up seeing a lot of data and then you're paralyzed by action. So it needs to be something that is a lot. As part of an overall process. So yeah, amazing. So my last question to you both, it's the same question I'm going to ask you. You might have the same answers. What does it mean to take a scientific approach to change, in your opinion?
Do you want to take it first, Brian?
I was going to say, I'll just say what he said. Look, so I suppose that is my background. So a scientific approach, right? To be really scientific and nerdy about it, like it's a formula. It's been systematic to certain things, okay? But I think really a scientific approach is to be open-minded about how to approach responsibly where you want to get your organization, to be critically thinking about how you should get there, and then ultimately to put systems in place that allow you measure change over time. And I would say as well on that, and so you can benchmark, compare where you were. So that's the key thing, because that is a systematic approach to improvement. And the other thing is, ultimately is to rely on expertise where you need to, right? You know what I mean? So if you are not from a background where you're really comfortable with a scientific approach, or you're comfortable with I don't know, there's different elements that people are comfortable with. You should rely on expertise to get you there, that support you on that journey. And everyone is responsible for kind of their key parts to it. But that's basically kind of a scientific approach or an evidence-based approach. We work off evidence, fact-driven, so that's kind of the
Yeah, and just add to that, Brian, as well. I think the big thing for me, and I always come back to this one, because I think we are at the cusp of this new way of working. Right? Forget about hybrid working and all the obvious stuff that people talk about. But there's this drive towards creating a new type of organization. And I actually think as leaders, we need to step back, clear our minds of any biases that we have. And I think that's where insights and wisdom have a real role here. Because if as leaders we're not willing to accept that data and accept that information, we're never going to change. So that's another big thing for me, in terms of a scientific approach. We also have to have an open mindset that receives data, and then we change and course correct based on that data. And that's where I often find within organizations I work with, that's where the rubber doesn't hit the road, because it's almost like there's the data that's telling us exactly the opposite of what we thought, but are we willing to change route and go that way? Okay, and I think that for me is equally important when it comes to this idea of a scientific approach. And for me, right at the core of a scientific approach is the adoption of a beginner's mindset. So looking at things and going, right, this is a fresh perspective. I'm going to look at this in an unbiased way, and I'm then going to act accordingly. So really interesting enough, adopting a scientific approach also means adopting a very human-centered approach, and being aware of our biases and being open to change. So it's so really interconnected that people get, even when I heard the word scientific approach, and I'm an engineer by trade, but people get scared. They go, that scientific approach, attack of the nerds, right? But actually, it's just as a leader recognizing, you don't know everything. You can be wrong, right? And data can give you insights when you're wrong, and that's for me is the magic of this scientific approach. It's actually that you go, whoa, I didn't look at it that way. But you have to be open to receive it, right? You can't just kind of go, oh, that's wrong. What are the guys doing there? You have to go, oh, actually, let's stand back from this now, guys. This is telling us something really significant. So it's a weird one in a way. That scientific approach means by default a more human, open, questioning, and unbiased approach. So,
absolutely, I could absolutely completely agree, right? Scientific approach is not devoid or mutually exclusive from being compassionate, empathetic, and human-centric. In fact, it's a duty of care to actually take information, if there's a best way of doing that, and then sit down and go, well, what does it mean? And just to come to one point you made there, if the data tells you something, that doesn't mean we have to go down the road of doing it. We can kind of go for, we need to think about how we communicate that or do something about that in the business, obviously, because we are sitting on some information, but you can gently do something, you know, go a little bit and go, how does it land with people? You know what I mean? And are people feeling that before we really go forward? You know, that's the key thing. So absolutely, I completely agree. It is, you know, it's a human, ultimately a scientific approach fits into that umbrella, which is a human-centric approach. You know, it's part of that, you know.
Yeah, I like that duty of our care. It's our duty as leaders to be able to use this wisdom and the design thinking and those methodologies as well to apply it to our people strategies moving forward. Amazing. Thank you both so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to more synergies moving forward.
Thanks, Elysia.
Yeah, thanks, Elysia. It's great.
Thanks so much for joining us today, and to find out more about the science of change, click the link below.